this is the fourth year in a row that you've lost. This is the second year that you got blown out by Ohio State. And in this rivalry game, this is the biggest rivalry in college football. You have got to win these games. And it doesn't matter if we beat Michigan State. It doesn't matter if you beat Penn State. It doesn't matter if you beat Wisconsin. This is the game that you have to win. And not only this game, but this is the expectation for Michigan now is reach the playoff, reach the national championship. That's the expectation. And if you can't even beat an Ohio State team, this is the worst Ohio State team possibly in the last 5 to 6 years, and you can't even get through this team that is having these down year right now. There has to be questions about whether Jim Harbaugh has to be on the hot seat.
So for one thing, you're giving quite a compliment to Urban Meyer and Ohio State, because despite all their troubles and despite all their issues off the field and on the field, mostly defensively and in the running game that got cleaned up in a hurry yesterday, that this is probably the worst Ohio State team, or at least they've played that way for 10 or 11 weeks, and they're 11-1 and should be a top 5 team, because that's pretty much the basement for them over the last 6 or 7 years. So this is the attempt at a balanced approach that I'll give you, is that you're absolutely right that Jim Harbaugh was hired at Michigan to win championships. He is paid at an elite level. So you've got Dabo, you got Jimbo, you got Saban, of course, Urban Meyer, Jim Harbaugh. Those guys are paid unlike anybody else. They're at the top, and therefore you're paid to win championships, and there are no excuses. Now, can anybody be expected outside of Nick Saban, I guess, based on what he's been doing, to win a championship every year? Of course not. But you should be in the playoff hunt, which of course they were this year, but they didn't get the job done. And you're not going to beat Ohio State every year, but you're now 0-4. Now we got to put each year into context in regards to him arriving on the scene to coach a 5-win football team. So he shows up in 2015. That's his first year. And the team was 5-7 the year before. He instantly makes them 10-3. And they lose a fairly close game to Ohio State. Well, in 2015, they got blown out by Ohio State. Okay. 2016, they play that ridiculous overtime game in which they didn't get the call on the measurement. And that was really the year that I came to Jim Harbaugh's defense, because if it comes down to the measurement of a football, he can't control that in a game that would have sent them to the college football playoff. They would have been a big favorite in the Big Ten championship game. You know, last year was really the downer when he lost a senior-oriented defense. He couldn't recover. He didn't have a quarterback. That's his fault. With O'Korn and with Brandon Peters last year, and they slumped to 8-5. So they rebounded very nicely, but they were not prepared for this game. So we've seen this a couple times. I would liken it from a preparation standpoint to last year's bowl game, in which they came unglued and were completely out coached by Will Muschamp and his staff in the second half, as they made adjustments and Jim Harbaugh did not. And in this game, yeah, I think equal amounts of credit and blame have to go to Urban Meyer and Jim Harbaugh, because Urban Meyer gave us another schooling in what he's been doing his entire career, and that's win rivalry games and get his team motivated and ready to go against its fiercest rival. He's done that at every stop. But on the other hand, Jim Harbaugh's he's being paid to knock the giant off the mountain. So he needs to do that very soon. And regardless of what happens in the rest of the regular season next year, he's going to have that game at home, and he's got to get it done here very soon. You're right.
And it sucks because there were so many top 5 recruits at that game, and it was either between Michigan and Ohio State that they're leaning toward. What do you think they're going to think after this game? There's a reason why Ohio State is winning the recruiting battle. They're always beating Michigan in the recruiting battle, and this is for this type of reason. This is how important every rivalry game is. That these teams are between Michigan and between Ohio State, and they're from from other states that are considering both schools very handily, they see this game. It's kind of like, well, now we'll just go to Ohio State. I mean, it sucks for it definitely sucks for Michigan. But I will say this, is that should he be fired? I don't think he's going to get fired. I mean, all those 10. This is, I believe, the second consecutive year with over 10 wins. Oh, I'm sorry, not the second consecutive year, but this is out of the 4 years, I think 3 of them has been 10-win seasons, I believe.
Exactly. He's gone 10-3, 10-3, 8-5, 10-2. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so he's had, I mean, no, he's not going to get fired. But the athletic, someone has got to come to him. And they got to say, listen, Urban, I wish he was Urban, but listen, Jim, you got to change your offense. You cannot keep running this pro style with fullback, hand it off to your running back 30, 40 times. Try to wish to see if you can get over 200 yards a game and have your defense play elite. You can't. That's not going to win you national championship. The last team to do that was Alabama back in 2015 when they beat Clemson. Besides that style does not work anymore. There is a reason why Iowa does not win national championships. There's a reason why Wisconsin does not win national championships. Michigan State tried that. They got dismantled in the playoff against Alabama. Alabama had to change it up because Nick Saban knew we can't keep running this style because we're not going, especially if we're going against high explosive offenses. Can we keep up? No, we're not going to keep up. What happened with Michigan? When the defense, we all know every defense is going to have a down game. The question is, as a head coach, what can you do to adjust and get your offense to compete with the other style? One thing that I can appreciate for Oklahoma is that yes, even though the defense is putrid, at least their offense can compete with anybody in the country as far as just putting up 30 or 40 points on anybody to try to get their defense get their defense right, get them motivated to try to make some plays and get some turnovers, which I mean, that's been Oklahoma's way for years now. That's one thing at least I can appreciate for some Big 12 schools. When Ohio State just kept scoring and scoring, Michigan's offense was like, we can't keep up. I mean, we just can't keep up with the style. Ohio State's defense is playing motivated. He has to change his offensive style. And the thing that shocked me is that in San Francisco with Colin Kaepernick, you ran the spread. You brought that offense to San Francisco. And you go back to Michigan and you go back to this pro style. It does not work anymore. There's a reason why these schools don't win championships. And if you're going to beat Ohio State in a down year, especially, we all know this defense is going to get better with the talent that they're bringing in, with the young talent behind them. It's only a matter of time before Ohio State is going to go back to playing elite defense. It's only going to be a matter of time. So if you keep playing this pro style thing about have a fullback in your back, it's just not going to work. And Shea Patterson, much as I like him, he had 187 yards like I predicted he was going to have. He is not one of the quarterbacks that are going to put up 300 yards in that type of system. That system does not fit him. He had the most success when he was in the spread with Ole Miss when he was throwing for 300 yards a game. Yes, was Ole Miss terrible? Yes. But he was at his best when he was over there. At Michigan, it feels like he's more limited in that type of system. He has to change that system if they're going to beat him. Will he do it? We'll find out. But he has to stop being stubborn. And I know Michigan fans are mad that our offense has yet again cannot make explosive plays, especially when we have 3 5-star receivers.
As you continued on with the conversation, it seemed like every time I was thinking, well, I'm going to jump on this point or that point or A, B, and C, you got to it next, and that was the final one in regards to the wide receiver core at Michigan. We saw yesterday, in particular, Nico Collins. and really across the board. Even Tariq Black got into the game and got a key catch on a third down early in the game. But Nico Collins, you can see what kind of skill and athleticism the kid has when given the opportunity to make plays. He made 2 outstanding touchdown grabs. But he could be doing that 10 or 12 times a game, much like we saw with the USC receivers last night. Their trio all catching 10 or 12 passes last night instead of catching 3 or 4. So I think we need to make a distinction between Jim Harbaugh, the CEO, and Jim Harbaugh, the offensive guru, because I think he is the right guy for the job, but he needs to, take a slice of humble pie in regards to bringing in a Ryan Day type like they have at Ohio State. A guy with a bright mind that can run an offense, an updated offense. I think Jim Harbaugh, I think his ties to Bo Schembechler and to what they did in the 70s and 80s are so rooted in him that even though he and from the time he was hired, we've talked about it a number of times on my channel about the Colin Kaepernick and his ability to adjust to run a pro style at Stanford and then go to the NFL and run that, ironically, run a college style in the pros and go to a Super Bowl and 3 NFC championship games, then come back to Michigan and try to go back to an Alabama LSU 2011 or 12 kind of offense. And he tries to implement elements of the spread, but still maintain that, 3 or 4 tight ends on the roster and the fullback that they like to play, a Mason. And he tries to do both. And try to be good at both. And I think I don't think there's any question that he is an elite coach and he is one of the best in the nation. And I don't know that anybody else, there are very few coaches that would have gone into Michigan, and we probably just named them a couple minutes ago. There's like 3 or 4 and would have turned that around to the degree that he did that quickly because man, in terms of a voice, in terms of a presence, in terms of credibility based on what he's done, knowing Michigan football and knowing the tradition. And I do think that I don't think that's extremely high on the list of priorities, but I think there's a place for that. And I think there's an edge there when you have somebody that understands the culture. So all the CEO, it's almost a similar comparison, different in many ways, but similar comparison to the Mark Richt issue at Miami. This is the guy that you want leading the program, but you want to be able to have a conversation with him and say, Jim, we love you. You're great because of A through F. You are our man and you're one of the elite coaches, but we definitely need your input into the offense, but we need you to pull back and we need to go on a search for one of the bright minds in college football that can create offense to keep up with what's going on today. And that's at that level of offensive performance and playmaking ability in terms of schemes, and we need to revise this thing, and then we should be all set. But you need to step back, and we need to find that guy or that group of guys, a quarterbacks coach and an offensive coordinator that can reach the elite, or otherwise we're going to be stuck in this 9-10 win mode.
I remember watching an interview for Nick Saban. When he was asked, like, when was the exact moment when you decided, okay, I can't stick around, I have to change literally everything up? And he said, when we lost to Trevor Knight in Oklahoma in the Sugar Bowl, he said, we're changing it. I can't. The old school, this style is not going to work anymore in today's college football. It's just not going to work. And I'll have to give so much credit to Saban for realizing this is not the way. I have to change it. And he's one of these old school coaches that loves to run the pro style and play elite defense, have about 330-pound defensive end, stuff to run as the first priority, get maybe one 270-pound pass rusher, and the rest of them are just some really decent players. That style was not going to work anymore. He adjusted, literally changed his entire foundation. Literally changed the entire foundation, having smaller linebackers, smaller and athletic more defensive linemen like Quentin Williams, having two or three really good offensive coordinators, and Sarkisian. I forgot what the FAU. Who's the
Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin was the guy that had, think about this. Blake Sims would never sniff an NFL roster, and he was the quarterback on that 2014 team that lit it up.
And he owns the record in passing yards. As a running back, he's the running back that changed the quarterback, and he owns the record. For most passing yards, with two is probably going to break it, but he owns that record.
Yep.
That's incredible. And then you got Mike, and then you bring in Mike Losley, who I really like a lot. I'm watching him back in Illinois. So Mike Losley was he's another dynamic offensive coordinator. So if Nick Saban can adjust, change his entire foundation, he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to give Tua to throw the ball 40 times a game. But guess what? That's the way to win. If you're going to beat teams like Ohio State, Oklahoma, Clemson nowadays, if you're going to beat Notre Dame, if you're going to beat these elite teams, you have to change your foundation. And one thing is that even if Michigan would have won this game, win the Big Ten, I don't know how they would have done in the college football playoff. Because what if they do go against an elite quarterback for Clemson or Alabama or any of these other type of schools? This is going to be the outcome. This is going to be the outcome because Jim Harbaugh cannot adapt, and he has to realize that his style that we're running it's going to win us games because we got the talent, but it's not going to win us a national championship because by the time we get to the playoffs, everybody's Ohio State. Everybody has the same exact talent as us, and at that point, styles win matchup, and he has to change that.
Yeah, it brings to mind a comment that I heard from who was the Sears, and I'm taking this in another direction real quick, but it definitely applies. The Sears CEO at the time, and this is way back, and I read this like just a couple years ago, but this was the statement made like back in the 70s or 80s when Sears owned retail, and they were number one at the top of the hill, and the CEO was asked, what are you going to do going forward as we propel into the future? And he basically said, I'm not going to do anything. We're number one. We're on the top. Our model is the model, and we're doing this right. And why should we change anything? We're number one. Well, within 5 or 10 years, they weren't number one, and now they've been run off the scene because they didn't take. You can take the principles. There are certain principles in life, certain principles in business, certain principles in running a football organization that will apply 100 years from now. You don't need to change your principles, but in regards to style of play, and because the game is constantly evolving, because people are figuring out better ways to scheme against, I watched a Super Bowl from 1979. This was during the off season. And I was just amazed because if you know anything, and I'm sure you do, about the development of the NFL, Tom Landry was a genius. He created the 4-3 defense. He created motion in the backfield. He created all these things. But to watch a 1979 Super Bowl was archaic. They were down by 18 points and they're huddling with 6 minutes left. So for as brilliant as he was, it's developed way beyond, he developed the shotgun. He was the only So to make that comparison, yes, you have to be able to, you can have your old style Bo Schembechler principles in terms of we're going to develop these kids and we're going to make them mean and make them fight and make them class individuals, and we're going to do all these things as people and as professionals and as student athletes. But when you get on the field, it's constantly evolving, and there are constantly bright minds coming into the business, developing different ways to do it. And that's something that's going to be interesting about watching Chip Kelly deal with what he needs to deal with at UCLA, because he's no longer ahead of the curve. And it's one of the reasons why I respect what Steve Spurrier was able to do, because he was the guy in the 1990s at Florida. By the time he got to South Carolina, suddenly his defenses were the reason that they were even winning 7-5 type seasons. And it took him a while to become an 11-1 head coach near the end of his tenure there at South Carolina. And they weren't doing anything spectacular or different from anyone else. They basically just adapted to what was going on. And then his sheer presence as a coach and being able to recruit and inspire the kids was the difference between them winning 7 and winning 11. But they actually just kind of caught up to everyone later, when just 15 years earlier, he was ahead of the curve. That's how quick it changes.
Everything you said was spot on. It's just you got to feel bad for the Michigan offensive players. I really do. You had Donovan Peoples-Jones was the second best receiver coming out of his class in 2015. Nico Collins was the #1 player in the state of Alabama coming out. He was heavily recruited by Alabama. Everybody thought he was going to go to Alabama. I thought he was going to go to Bama. And when he put the Michigan, when he decided to go to Michigan, I'm like, oh, wow, Michigan got a stud. Then you get a guy in Tyreek Black. You have another stud. Then you get Zach Gentry, even though he's more considered a block and tight end. When he gets to the NFL, he's going to be used as a receiving tight end, and he will be used right. I guarantee you that. Zach Gentry is a stud. You have dudes at the receiving, at the tight end position, even as your backups. You have nothing but 3-4 stars as your backups at the receiving position, and you can't find a way to use them. It was just hard watching this game because if you can't adjust in the game, if you can't adjust in the game, when will you adjust? When will you stop being stubborn and focus your running on Karan Higdon? It's like, I'm not even a Michigan fan. I don't like Michigan, but it was just frustrating to just watch this football team play the way that they have been for the last 4 or 5. If your style has not been working for the last 4 years, how did you expect this game to turn out to be? I don't know. Maybe the revenge tour with Chase Winovich leading the charge. Maybe that was going to motivate him. Maybe it was Karan Higdon going up on the podium and saying, well, this is going to be a guaranteed victory, which, yeah, that definitely helped out, right? That's what motivated your eyes to play harder. I know if you're a Michigan fan, you are frustrated. I feel it. I get it. It's just sad that these players, these NFL first round, that these talents are not getting utilized right. It's just not right.